No more. They've decided to move on to somebody competent, but asked that I do the introductions today. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I said somebody competent. Oh, there's, see, power pose and all. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for showing up. This is great. We now have over 700 people who are receiving the emails on this. We'd call them members, but membership doesn't require anything except surrendering your email address, so that's kind of a stretch to call you a member. But that's a pretty good mailing list, and we are, because of that, we're streaming the meetings we're having now, these quarterly meetings, and also recording that stream and making it available on our website at Oregon, I'll get it. You got to get it right. It's a waste of time if you don't get it. It's OregonResearch.com. Org. Okay, once again, that's why we edit video. OregonResearch.org. So if you want to see the stream of this and laugh again at me, it will be available there within just a few days. It is streaming right now, though, and we want to let everyone else out there in the world who are seeing it now be acknowledged as being committed enough that they're at least willing to show up for the video. And those of you who are watching it some time from now, thank you. Time shifting is exciting, isn't it? We do have a couple of presentations for you today and a break in between for some further networking, which may be agonizing for some of you. It seemed like it might have been a challenge. But we'll try to keep that to a minimum. We don't want to put you in too much of a discomfort. Our first presentation, though, is entitled Research to Inform Statewide Transfer Policy for Community Colleges and Universities. This is a presentation from Sean Pollack at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, the auspicious name of HEC. You probably all thought about going to HEC. Anyway, Sean's going to be making the presentation this afternoon. Sean's the University Academic Policy Specialist and Program Administrator at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. Office of University Coordination. Commas are important. There's a comma missing. He works on legislation and policy related to student transfer between sectors and other student and academic affairs. Sean has worked as faculty and administrator at public and private institutions in California and Oregon, and he holds an MPA from Portland State University Hatfield School of Government. So we'll turn the floor over to Sean.
Got it. Thank you. Is my mouse here? Okay. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Thanks to Felicia for inviting me. Thanks to Sora for holding this event. Thank you, Jan, for the introduction. I appreciate it. So, as was noted, this concerns transfer policy between sectors, between higher ed sectors, between particularly public community colleges and public universities. Some of what I say could be applicable to private universities as well and other private post-secondary institutions, but that's where our focus is for this talk today, and that's where we focus our energies for policy, for transfer policy. And I want to note before going on that this presentation today will have probably some of the telltale signs of being cobbled together from previous presentations. So I want to make sure that you're all aware that the research being presented today, the way it's being framed, represents a whole lot of effort by a lot of other people just besides me. Jan mentioned the Office of University Coordination. There's also the Office of Research and Data. We have a lot of offices in the HEC. The Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. I think there are at least 2 people from CCWD here today. And the Office of the Executive Director, Communication and Legislative Policy. This is not I cannot claim that this work is my own. This work is spread across multiple offices within the agency. And it also includes the direct efforts of faculty, staff, administrators at the community colleges, at the public universities as well. So that all needs to be set up front. So before we go on, actually, and Dan and Casey can answer this, how many community colleges are there in the state of Oregon? 30? You're the Price is Right here. You got the closest without going over. It's 17. 17. How many public universities? I hear 8. I hear 9. Any other guesses? right? Here are 4. Turns out there are 7 public universities. There are the 3 major ones. I guess that's not correct, call them major. The 3 largest ones, Oregon State, U of O, PSU, all located in the Willamette Valley. And then there are 4 more that are known collectively as the Technical and Research Universities, or TRUs. Eastern, and they all have points on the compass, Eastern, Southern, Western, and no, not all of them, and Oregon Tech, which is in Klamath Falls. Right? So there are 7 public, so that's 24 institutions in all. Between those 2 institutions, how many different major pathways or articulation agreements are there between those 24 institutions? How many different ways are there to get from Community College A to University X? Infinite? You're as right as anybody else, because nobody knows exactly. And there is no way to find out. There is no easy way to find out unless you want to go spend hours and hours counting them, calling people, emailing people, and being very frustrated. And it's in the hundreds, right? We used to try to keep track of them. We found it was not an impossible task, but it was one of those diminishing returns things, is the more time you spend on it. So, a lot of ways to transfer students to get from point A to point B, but as we'll see, there are they're not seamless. They're not simple. They're not as perhaps coherent as they might be, or as they ought to be, or as they can be. And that's really the subject of this research, and that's the broader subject of what we're talking about today. Why is this a matter for the heck? Why is this any of my business? Why is this any of the state's business? I mean, within our strategic plan, our agency strategic plan, we see that one of the central reasons for our existence is to bring together formerly separate entities like CCWD, like the University Coordination, or what used to be the Chancellor's Office, together to work together with the institutions to help students get from community college to university, if that's where they want to go. There are lots of things you can do at a community college besides transfer from there to a university, but we think but that's a big part of their mission, and we want to help them accomplish that mission, and we want to help students succeed. So why does it matter, right? Why is this a matter of state interest? Why is this a matter of interest for us? You can find lots of different statistics like this, but according to some studies, this is national research, 81% of community college students say they want to transfer, they want to get a bachelor's degree. About 11% of degree-seeking students in Oregon actually do make that transfer and do complete. This is from the National Center for Education Statistics. So we're talking about low completion rates. And again, students change their mind. Students are human beings. There's a lot of different paths open to them. They might find, oh my gosh, I was going to transfer to Portland State, but I actually love welding, and that's what I'm going to do. And that's totally fine. So we don't consider that a failure, but there's a lot more to the statistic, but we suspect that there's a lot more students who would transfer and would complete if they could and if they had the resources, and most of all, that's something that we can actually do about, if the policies were in place and there was a better alignment between the two sectors, that if it was easier to find my way, right? Why else does this matter? We really think that transfer is an equity issue for the agency. That is, the community college student is not the non-traditional student. The non-traditional student is now the normal student. The community college student is the single mom. The community college student is the adult returning to the workforce. The community college student is the student who, for whatever reason, wasn't well served by another institution or another educational pathway and is making another effort to get back in there. The students are more likely to be students of color. They're more likely to be first generation. They're more likely to be students who are under different economic stresses. So it's an equity imperative for us as well to think about the needs of transfer students and to make sure that the institutions have the resources they need and that we're providing the help that we can to make that pathway from community college to university more legible, more visible. But again, you say, or not you, but others have said, I'm still not seeing the problem. Students are human beings. They're free to make choices. The ethos of college has always been higher education. These people are adults. They're free to fail. Why is this a problem? So we've literally heard from, when I generalize about this, I've heard, when I say institutions, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm not going to name institutions, but we've heard from institutions that we don't see evidence of the problem. Show us the evidence. And we say, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's a good point. We do need to show you the evidence. We do need to find the evidence here in Oregon that there's something systemically wrong that is preventing students from making that jump from community college to university. So again, we're going to look at this from a few different perspectives. A wide-angle lens that we're talking about students in Oregon who've earned at least 24 to 36 credits and then are trying to take those credits from community college to university. And then we're going to look at students after they transfer, and then we're going to say a little bit about how students experience that and view it due to some qualitative study that has been done for the agency. And then there should be a number 4 here. We're going to go even a little bit deeper to find out how these systemic misalignments, if that's what they are, express themselves in student outcomes, that is, time to degree, or the accumulated credits to degree, for example. Again, more national level research. 29% of Oregon has on average, an average 29% community college transfer out rate and a bachelor completion rate for community college students. Of that 29%, 38% go on to complete a bachelor's within 6 years. Again, this is slightly old research. It's using the 2007 cohort, but we don't think it's changed all that much since then. That's for all institutions. Really what we're concerned with, though, is public institutions. So again, that 29% transfer out rate translates into a 35% 6-year bachelor's degree attainment. Of that 29%, 35% go on to finish, right? So this is where our interest is really confined. This is the population who we're trying to think about. And again, I'll say that as I present these various data points, these various charts, what have you, it reflects our evolving understanding of transfer student success, transfer student outcomes, and the transfer student population. So take it in that light. Take it in that what I'm saying now might reflect how we thought about this in 2015. What I'm saying at the end might reflect more about what we're thinking about this in 2018. But a couple of years ago, we started thinking about the graduation rate by transfer students in the 2015, of students who graduated in 2015-16. So we're talking about third-year persistence, right? Students who persisted to a third year. Non-transfer students, that is first-time freshmen, enter the university as first-time freshmen. They persist from third year to graduation at 82% or 82.4. Transfer students who persist to that third year graduated at a 62% rate. That's a significant difference. Now in theory, the theory of the community colleges, you get that transfer degree, 90 credits. How many credits in a degree, in a bachelor's degree in Oregon? 180, right? So you get that associate's degree, that transfer degree of 90 credits. You should be good to go for 90 more credits. You should be 90 credits away from graduation. But that's not what we're finding. So we started to think about, well, what about, we know that everybody takes longer to graduate now. We know that everybody, that's why we use a 6-year graduation rate, not the 4-year. If we looked at the 4-year, it'd look terrible. That's why we use the 6-year graduation rate for all students, right? And if it takes 180 credits to graduate for most degrees, right? That's not all degrees. A lot of technical degrees are more. There's a civil engineering at PSU might take 187, let's say. But the vast majority are 180. So how many students or how many credits are students accumulating by the time they finish? So if we look at accumulated credit as a proxy for their time to degree or for the efficiency of the program that they've been in, or the ease with which they navigate this system, we find that, again, all students earn too many credits, right? 201 on average. Transfer students earn about 211 on average. So that's plus 10, right, for transfer students. Yes, please. Yeah, we're only counting college level classes. We're not counting Dev Ed. And I don't think we're counting CTE either, but I'm not going to swear to that.
That could probably be much higher.
Exactly. We're talking about the number of credits that a transfer student brought with them and were actually counted towards the degree, not necessarily the number they took, right? So we'll see there could be a difference there in a moment. Yeah. Thanks for that question. Please.
Just as our personal family history, my niece got her double major from OSU. She went to Eastern Oregon State. She was a dual enrolled student, and she still had to take 2 years worth of credits at OSU to finish up her dual major.
Right.
And it was like she was dual enrolled the whole way, and they still didn't want to accept credits that she had. So even when there's systems and policies in place to make it seamless between institutions that have really concrete contracts between them, it still doesn't work out that way.
That's a very common. Your story rings familiar to me. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's a story that we hear when students call us and want to know what they can do about this, or why, just why this is happening, right? Yes, please.
On the other side, when you cut to 11%, is the denominator the cohort going into community colleges that would complete a bachelor's within 6 years? That was the denominator?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, that's not entirely an accurate reflection of the mission of a community college, right? It's people go to community colleges to take 1 or 2 classes, to learn something, and then to get a promotion. And we shouldn't view that as a failure or as not a success, right? But if 80% are saying they want to get to the bachelor's degree, but only roughly 11% or so are, that's a big difference. So we're trying to account for the factors that create that difference. Number of credits earned at the degree awarding university. Again, for transfer students, they earn about 105 credits per degree after transfer. And for the first-time freshmen, it's about 182. Again, that should raise some questions as well, because what counts as a transfer student, or who counts as a first-time freshman? If I bring 6 credits from Mount Hood and I go to PSU, I'm not counted as a transfer student. But we'll find out in a minute that there's no real regularity to those definitions either, at least statewide. So this plus 10 number that I'm talking about, plus 10 credits, I've had officials at institutions look at that and say, 10 credits, it's not that much. And it's okay, it's like roughly 3 classes if you're at a 3-credit institution, or 2 and a half. So I thought about this, and yeah, it's not that much, unless you translate it into dollars. And they didn't find that funny at all. So don't make that equation if somebody else says that to you. What are students telling us about transfer? Students, this is from a qualitative study done by some University of Oregon public policy students. Did interviews with students who had transferred into a number of the public universities. Information, right? There's a common theme here. Information, advising, direction, explanation, more information, right? So what we're hearing from students is not that it's hard, but that it's confusing. Not that the academic requirements are unreasonable, not that the expectations of the institutions are unreasonable in terms of the number of classes one must take, but that it's confusing to navigate your way from community college to university. And there is, so students, those of you who work with students or have ever worked with students at any higher ed institution will know that students, you can lead a student to advising, you can't make them go to an advising appointment. You can't make them follow the advising they get. But more often is the case is that it's really hard for them to get advising because they're working 2 jobs plus going to school plus have a kid plus whatever. And there is no easy way to find this information for yourself. Now, that's not to say that individual institutions are all trying to do their due diligence. They all believe they're doing right by their students, transfer students and otherwise, and they are all trying to do that. But there's no easy way, there's no simple way for a student who is at a community college and doesn't know what major they want to enter and what institution they want to end up at to find that, to navigate that path, to find that path without some real expert help. And students, as you know, more and more just self-advise, or they rely upon their friends to give them advice. Sometimes that advice is good, and sometimes it's, we don't know. This was a big takeaway for us, looking at this cohort that we're talking about that had at least 24 to 36 credits of transfer work. Something like 63% of them enter the universities with fewer credits than they earned at the community college. And of that group, 35% lost more than 1 term of work, or 15 credits. Now, again, that gets into real money, because they'll have to make those up somewhere else. And there could be lots of reasons why that's happening. It may not all be due to systemic inefficiencies. It may not all be due to, in fact, it's probably not all due to misaligned policy, but some of it is. Some of it is. But what does that mean to lose a credit at transfer? We're going to come back to that word, lost or losing, and try and unpack that a little bit. So what's the problem? What are the solutions? You can just cross a line through that. What are the solutions? Because we're not going to get there today. But it should really say, what's the problem and whose problem is it? I think that's a little bit of the conversation that we're having now statewide. There's a long history of legislative work going on, legislation being passed that affects transfer policy. You can see it's going back to at least 1987, probably before then. 2011, something called the Transfer Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. It was enshrined in law. ORS 341430, it's actually not there anymore. That's actually outdated. It's now in ORS 350 somewhere, but it's still there, right? But what it says is that somebody's responsible for creating something called the Transfer Student Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. It's not there yet. No one's actually gotten around to doing that. We can talk about a little bit about why later. House Bill 2970 in 2013 called for the recommendation of specific statewide transfer degrees. Some of those degrees are in place now. One's called the Associate of Arts Oregon Transfer, or AAOT. There are 2 others called Associate of Science Oregon Transfer, and two disciplines, business and computer science. That Associate of Arts Oregon Transfer is still a statewide transfer instrument. It's not in law, but it's in rule. And it's supposed to allow any student to start at any community college in Oregon, get 90 credit associate's degree, and then jump over to the university with junior status and with all of their lower division gen ed fulfilled. For some students it works that way. For other students it does not. And there's lots of different reasons why, but that we could talk about. But the fact is those statewide transfer instruments aren't working as the efficient kind of policy or the efficient degrees that they were meant to be for a lot of students. So again, going back to whose problem this is, there's kind of an authority gap, at least in statute, right? Our agency's authority is pretty circumscribed within ORS 350. There's no, and we're the only state agency, I've been told this, I'm relying on what I've been told by others, but we're the only state agency that has no implied authority at all. We have only those specifically enumerated authorities in statute. So what we hear is that HEC has no authority to regulate transfer or to act or to create policy on transfer. There's no more State Board of Higher Education, as you know. There's this commission. The commission is both the agency that we work for and also a 14-member appointed commission by the governor that has responsible for coordinating policy responses and other duties regarding all of statewide higher education. That means private post-secondary, that means public, that means community colleges. But so there used to be something called the State Board of Higher Education, which had a chancellor's office. Those entities no longer exist, legally or otherwise. And so now institutions are more free than I think they've ever been, perhaps in a long time or ever, to create their own unilateral transfer policies and to enter into more and more bilateral transfer agreements. Some of those are really good, so I'm not painting them all with the same brush, and I'm not painting all institutions with the same brush when I say that there are systemic problems or inefficiencies. For example, I know PSU and PCC work very hard on getting their pathways aligned really, really well, because PSU is the largest transfer serving institution in the state. I think 50% or more of their student body. So there's this gap, right? Whose problem is this in order to define it? And in order to make a stronger case that this is, at least in part, our problem to help define and our problem to help coordinate solutions on, we had to find a stronger evidentiary kind of basis for this. Because rightfully so, institutions would say, this is about curriculum, and curricula is the province of the faculty and nobody else, the institutions and the faculty. That's true. So how do we do it then? How do we come together and how do we work on this? And again, you still got to define the problem. How do you define the problem? Because there's no statewide agreed upon definition as to what constitutes a transfer student. Each institution, each university, for example, counts it a little differently, or is allowed to set their own threshold for who counts as a transfer student and who doesn't. And when they report numbers on transfer students, they're using their own definitions. They're not using a statewide agreed upon definition, as far as I know. We're really not able to track very well any single transfer student through the pipeline, through the community college to university pipeline, because there are two different data systems, one for community colleges, one for universities. We're working on solving that. There's a new system called D4A. But the identity matching, at least a year ago when we were trying to do this, the identity matching can be really difficult. They have a very high threshold for matching identities across the two systems. And then finally, there's the problem of saying, well, students are losing credits. Well, credits aren't really lost. I mean, it's not like they fall out of, it's not like they just disappear. They're on the transcript somewhere. The question is, how are they coming over? Are they being counted by the receiving institution? And in what way are they being counted? So they might be brought over, they might articulate, but they might articulate only as electives. And this is a part of this is a piece of the story that we're hearing, is that students in good faith are taking courses that they believe count toward a major, that they find out later, no, we're going to count this as an elective because here at our institution, that thing you took as a lower division prerequisite for your major doesn't count here. So you've got to take our version of that. That's the real problem I think that we want to focus in on or zero in on and try to solve collaboratively. But again, we still needed a better way to talk about this. So if we're not going to talk about lost credits, maybe we should focus more upon what we were talking about a moment ago, which is accumulated credits to degree. Here we have two cohorts, the 2010 fall fourth week and the 2011 fall fourth week. And what have they been able to do between 2010 and 2016? First, again, we're seeing the two cohorts, not much difference between the first-time freshman students, right? They've got 201 versus 200, virtually almost no difference. Again, virtually no difference either with transfer students with less than 90 credits. Okay? A transfer student with less than 90 credits might finish within about 205. That's not so bad. A transfer student with more than 90 credits, 221 or 222. All transfer students together, roughly 214, 215. So I look at that and say, wait a minute, I thought the idea was you get your first 90 or so, maybe you take some electives, maybe you get a few false starts here and there, whatever. I get that first 90, then I'm good to go for another 90. Turns out, it looks like, at least just from this really crude kind of way of thinking about it, the more credits you take at the community college, the longer you're going to end up taking to graduate. When it should be it should kind of even out there, right? At least that's how the system was imagined or thought about working. So what happens when we do this? Well, when we were able to kind of refocus the conversation on, yes, there's a problem, yes, there's anecdotal evidence, yes, there's qualitative evidence, and yes, we have some quantitative evidence that there's a problem, and that another report isn't going to solve the problem. Once we got, a few legislators and some administrators and some institutions together in the room, agreeing that there's a problem, okay, what can we do about that? Well, there's a couple of ways to approach this. We're talking about lower division gen ed, and then we're talking about majors, right? So House Bill 2998 passed in 2017, and that called for the development of a foundational curriculum. That means the first 30 credits or so of the first year gen ed that could be common to all students, regardless of where they're starting and where they're ending up if they're in a community college and planning to transfer to a university. That doesn't necessarily mean all the same courses, but that means a common set of requirements that they all agree upon will all fulfill these foundational requirements. It also requires, there's some reporting in there, obviously, right? But it also requires the development of specific major pathways. We're calling them USTAs, or Unified Statewide Transfer Agreements, right? Or if you're familiar with the discourse of guided pathways, that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about new degrees, and we're not talking about new AAOTs or anything like that. We're talking about existing degrees being better aligned so that any student from community college A can find his or her way to University X without knowing necessarily that they plan to go to University X first day of their freshman year at community college. So a map, it's really a roadmap. We're talking about new roadmaps for students. A course sequence, a sequence of courses, and a way to get from community college to university from any of those points within the state within a given major. So not just the lower division gen ed, not just the pre-major stuff, but I know I'm prepared to enter into a state public university in this given major, right? But then that raises the question, which majors, right? Because those agreements have to be developed not by people like me, but by faculty, by disciplinary faculty from the institutions, and it has to be something that they agree that they're going to do. So which majors are we going to start with? How will we know? So there was a series of work group meetings that took place over 4 or 5 months to decide that very question. Which are going to be the first majors that we'll look at as having these new guided pathways in place? Well, what's one way that we look at that? Well, we look at excess credit. So let's break it down. Let's break down excess credits by major. And I'm sorry this may be difficult to see, but let's look at, so if we rank them in the top 20, you'll see civil engineering has an average excess credit rate of 27.7. And then that goes down from there. Allied health is a big one, 25. Computer science, 24. An average might be 12, 13, 15. Something like English language and literature, only 12, but that's still more than we would like to see. On down the line. We found that the lowest number of excess credits per major is actually in romance languages and literature. There's actually virtually no difference. In fact, community college students apparently earn 0.6 credits, fewer credits than first-time freshmen. I don't know how that works, but basically it means statistically there's no difference between what transfer students in romance languages and literature end up with as number of credits versus their first-time freshman counterpart. So our goal maybe ought to be to have as many students as possible end up with that no statistical difference, no significant difference between transfer students and first-time freshmen in any given major, right? So how did we choose the first majors to work upon? We've got 4 that are really lined up, and the work groups are going to start meeting actually as soon as next week. The first 4 majors are going to be business, biology, English, and education. When I say education, I just mean a bachelor's of ed, not the postgraduate certificate, just a bachelor's of ed. So what were the factors that we used? In addition to that excess credit total, that was one factor among some others. There was also popularity amongst transfer students. That's why biology, that's why business. Those are 2 biggies, and those are 2 very popular transfer majors that have a lot of excess credit totals. The workforce demand, again, you can easily make the case for business. You can make the case for biology as a preparation for health occupations. Same for education and English as well. It's hard to gauge workforce demand for English, but you can say, employers say they want people who think critically, who can write, who can speak well, et cetera, right? And also there's an equity, and we had a very hard time quantifying that or giving that a good weight factor or defining that. But that was one of the key areas that the work group wanted to think about. But really, I see this as starting kind of with excess credit and then working out to these other factors. Excess credit isn't the most important, but it's one of our better proxy measures for transfer efficiency in a given major. There's some problems with it, though, right? We don't know in any given major or broadly statewide or broadly, education-wide, we don't know how much of the excess credit is generated due to this policy misalignment that I've been saying probably exists or does exist, at least we're hearing exists. And we're not just hearing it from students, by the way. We're actually hearing it from faculty. We're hearing it from administrators as well. We can't do transcript level analysis without the cooperation of the institutions. In other words, they have to be willing to give us transcripts of students so that we can look at, X number of transcripts in a given major of transfer students and figure out where they accumulated all these credits and figure out, what the patterns of credit taking are. They can de-identify them, but that's still kind of a, depending on how you read FERPA, the Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, that could be a little bit of a point of discussion. And again, another limitation is that it'll take years before we'll know that whether any of these guided pathways are having the intended effect. It could be 5 or 6 years. It could be another year before any of these first 4 majors guided pathways are in place. And it could be another 5, 6 years before we can start to say anything about whether it's affecting the factors that we're talking about, that is the generation of excess credits per degree, or time to degree, or graduation rates, or retention, or persistence, or any of those factors. It could be years before we know whether any of this is paying off. So it will require a high degree of sustainability. It will require a high degree of effort, rather, to sustain. It will require a high degree of effort to maintain. It will require a higher degree of cooperation between institutions to do that. It's not really on us. It's upon them to make sure that these agreements stay in place, that they're honored, and that when differences or disagreements do arise, that they come together and figure those out. But again, the goal, and this was a goal expressed by faculty, not just by us, the goal is no significant difference in accumulated credit totals in a given major for transfer students versus first-time freshmen. That's all I got. I'll take questions if you have them.
We would ask if you get a question, just repeat the question for the viewers at home.
I will. Thanks. In the back. I'm sorry.
Do you think that there could be a incentive between the transfer universities and the student loans? Because it seems like there's the more money that these transfer students
The more credits they have to take,
the more enriches, the.
So the question is there this perverse incentive, I guess, for students to stay for the universities and other institutions, really, to keep the student in the system longer, accumulating more credits, taking more classes, paying more tuition, getting more financial aid dollars in. It's been argued that's been argued. I think that that conversation is starting to change. I don't know. I'm sure, in fact, I feel certain that no administrator sits up in his or her office saying, how can we keep them here longer so that they have to pay more? And that'll keep our graduation rate down, but at least we'll be getting more tuition. So I don't think anyone's thinking in that way, certainly. I think, though, that the changeover to the funding formula, there's a different funding formula now in place for the public universities that relies not just upon seat time or FTE, but also relies upon completion. So that completion is now the main driver, the main thing that's driving that's the main incentive, I guess, that's driving funding, the funding model for the universities. And there are actually additional incentives to produce more graduates in certain degrees, certain areas, and also more graduates of certain types, traditionally underrepresented populations. So they have now an actual a monetary incentive to focus their efforts on those students who need the most help. And I would argue that transfer students ought to be in that incentive population. But right now, a university gets 60% of the revenue or the money they would get from the state. They get 60% for a transfer student of what they would get for a first-time freshman graduating. So when a transfer student graduates, that degree is worth 60% of what a first-time freshman's degree is. I think that's a little off. That's me personally saying that. That's not the agency speaking. That's just, I think that we ought to revisit that. You had a, sir.
Very interesting, very good.
Thanks.
It'd be interesting to compare community college students to students who transferred between the major universities.
Yeah.
Or students who stayed but changed majors. So
Yes.
you'd expect some, I don't know, some extra credits as a result of changing priorities.
Yeah,
And so
you would find that for certain. You would find that when students, whether they're staying in or whether they're first-time freshmen or transfers, if you change your major, you're going to rack up credits, right? And we look at that actually as one of the factors in weighting which majors we would look at first for these new guided pathways. One of the factors was the highest transfer out rate for a major and which majors people transfer into out of other majors. So the findings wouldn't be that shocking perhaps. Engineering has a high transfer out rate and people land in mathematics or something else. And nursing, for example, has a high transfer out rate and people land in something else, right? So yeah, that's definitely a big part of the problem. But you're speaking directly to the issue, which is it's really, really hard for us right now with the tools that we have at our disposal. It's really hard for us to isolate how much of this generation of excess credit is due to just misalignment of policies, even if a student does almost everything right? It's hard to isolate. It's not 100%. It may not even be 50. It may be much less than that. But we believe that we can at least, if we are able to create better guided pathways and better information systems between the sectors, then fewer people will have fewer of those false starts. I changed my major a couple times, probably. But it was because I figured some things out. It wasn't because I didn't have information. It was because, I actually think I like this better. But there are people who have little to no idea about maybe what they're getting into when they start first-time freshmen as a particular kind of major, and then learn more later, like, oh, wait, I have to do that? I have to take calculus? Why didn't you tell me? I would have done something else. So there's a lot of different reasons, and it's really hard to isolate them. But we're focusing on what we can focus on right now. But I hope we are going to be able to do more of that kind of research later. Hi.
So, just another example for my niece's transfer from Eastern Oregon to Oregon State. She had to retake like a higher level upper division class that was offered at both universities. And basically she took it and it was the exact same class, but I think there was sort of a pissing contest between the two departments. Because, you didn't take our soil class. You have to take OSU's soil class because we're the best. And I think she had that happen on several of her upper division classes that didn't transfer. Also coming in as a transfer student, there wasn't any equity about her being able to sign up for the class and get into it. She had to wait 1.5 years to take the science class, the soil class, because other people who were already at the university maybe had a jump in, registration preference compared to her.
Yes.
So
what you're describing is something that we hear a lot about. That is classes that, and even lower division classes that ought to be even, if not identical, roughly equivalent, writing, math, are seen as being unique and special at a given, institution. And it's because, and I understand that. It's because the faculty have a high degree of ownership and pride in what they're doing, and do believe that sometimes they do believe that what they're doing is better than how they do it over there or wherever. But to the extent that we can bring people together to say, let's actually compare the learning outcomes, let's base it on things that we can, agree upon. Learning outcomes and what a student is actually required to do. If we compare those two things, we find that they're actually not so different. So I was involved in a project called the Interstate Passport through Western Interstate Commission of Higher Education, WICHE. The passport is something like what we were trying to do, but on a broader, almost national scale now. That is, they're trying to come up with a common set of learning outcomes for lower division general education. Again, not majors, not upper division, lower division gen ed, writing, math, science, humanities, social science, right? Here's a set of learning outcomes and criteria that people in, I think it's now 12 states, faculty came together, they looked at it and said, yeah, we can agree upon these. They're not that different. And they're not out of whack with our own institutional outcomes. So we can live with these as this set of outcomes as denoting transfer level proficiency. Not mastery, just proficiency in these kind of key areas. And we'll let you come over and bring, that roughly year and a half worth of credit with you intact. And we won't unpack it and we won't mess with it. So if you complete a passport, what they call a passport, it's not a degree, it's more like a notation on the transcript. But if you complete that much, then they'll say, yeah, okay, we see this as lower division gen ed as being good, and we're not going to mess with it. We're not going to make you retake any of this stuff. So if 12 states can come together and figure that out, then, then the institutions within Oregon ought to be able to do that. Something similar. Please.
When I did this 35 years ago, all of my Lynn Benton credits transferred to University of Oregon. And, I came in as a junior.
And
So-
when I was a student, there were many years ago myself, the system that we have in place really worked well for people of my generation, probably in earlier generations. For today's students, it's not working quite as well. And I don't know why that is. That could be because there are dozens of majors that there weren't, even a decade ago, even because things have changed. Because the basic lower division gen ed curriculum, calculus hasn't changed. Right? Maybe how you teach has changed, but calculus hasn't changed. Math, algebra hasn't changed. But at the major level, at the upper division level, there are things that I had never heard of, when I was a student. So there's also the fact that when you have even a really tight articulation agreement between the two institutions or two or more, if those people move on, if they move on to other things, if they retire, the institutional memory leaves, then the memory of that, how that agreement's supposed to work also leaves. Or if it's not maintained, or if it's not updated to reflect, current lower division learning outcomes or current prerequisites in the major or whatever it is, if it's not maintained, then students can start following it in good faith and then end up, somewhere where they're not supposed to be. Dan, please.
Predicated on more credits are undesirable. And it seems like there are a lot of potential reasons for that. One might be the time it takes you to begin earning money. And another reason that more credits might be undesirable is that credits themselves are expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how, and I have a desk at CCWD, but I work for Portland Community College, kind of. So I'm not speaking for CCWD at all, but I'm curious how HEC sees its role in changing the underlying fundamentals. Like, how does HEC join the conversation about the need for guided pathways to move students quickly to earning money perhaps, but also working on the amount that those credits cost as being one of, I think, the primary drivers for this conversation?
Yeah.
Like, if the credits were free, would we feel the same level of urgency that you're presenting right now?
Yeah, so Dan's question is something like, tell me if I got this right. How do we balance the need for systemic efficiency and the costs associated with that with the actual realities that students face, that is, wanting to get through the system efficiently, but also wanting to discover something about themselves, learn something, not just get out and get a job. And I'm putting words in your mouth, Dan, so stop me. Are we incentivizing completion at the expense of all of the other things, great things that education can and should be?
Yeah, so I guess my first question is, like, how is HEC working on the fundamentals. And
Yeah.
I think one of the important fundamentals here is the cost of education in
Yeah.
the state of Oregon. And then I think a great follow-up question would be the one you just posed, which is like, more credits in a less expensive environment might be a
not be a
fantastic
bad thing.
self-actualization.
Exactly.
Other than it could potentially delay the time to earning, which would then
Yeah.
have its own implications as well.
I can attest to the second thing, that more credits, when they're inexpensive, when you can afford to pay for them out of pocket, are awesome. I don't know how many credits I racked up at a community college before transferring, right? I don't know how many times I changed my major, a couple probably. But you know, I was at what, $27 a credit hour or something like that. When I got to university, they said, "Oh, look at your GPA, ching, scholarship." I never saw another bill. So it didn't, as long as I maintained that GPA, it was fine, you know, because they made that simple for me. They made that so that I didn't have to think about those things and I could concentrate on what I was learning and what I was hoping to get out of it. I wasn't thinking about jobs at all. I was thinking, once I was in university, I was like, God, I want to stay here the rest of my life. This is awesome. And so I did, kind of. So the first part is, what are we doing about costs? What are we doing about the cost to student? That's a really good one. As you know, there's a finance team that works kind of on a parallel track with us, but you know, I think we should work a little bit more closely. A lot of that has to do with, according to the institutions, a lot of that has to do with the fixed costs that they can't do anything about, that is labor contracts and so on, and also the amount of appropriation they get from the state directly, right? Now, every year, Ben Cannon, who you know is our executive director, goes in front of the legislature at the beginning of every session and said, here's the pattern, here's the trend line of appropriations from 1990 to today. Here's the trend line of tuition from 1990 to today. We think there's a relationship. And and they all agree, yeah, there is. I'm sorry, I wish we could do more. And so we keep having that conversation. I don't know, we're not all, none of us, at the HEC, at least in the conversations I'm involved in, are talking about fundamentally changing, how we fund higher education. But I think at some point, we're going to have to talk about that. I'm sorry, that's the best I can do.
I'm going to have to interrupt here, and I
Yeah.
hate to do it. This is great that
Going
people
over time,
care
yeah.
about a presentation. It's a good thing that we have gotten people engaged. But it is time for a break. We want to start the next presentation at 3, and that means we're pretty short on a break. So I'm going to give you a break now. We'll start at 3 p.m. for the next presentation. That'll make it easier for anybody who watches the live stream later to know when to come in. So thank you, Sean. Do appreciate it.